And this is Chris with the Oregon Parks and Recreation Department. This meeting is being streamed live. I'm going to turn it over to Hearings Officer Tyler Blanchett. You can start whenever you like in the next minute or so, Tyler. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Good evening. My name is Tyler Blanchett. I'm the Ocean Shore Permit Coordinator for the Oregon Parks and Recreation Department. I'll be running the hearing tonight. Also with us from the department is Chris Havel, Associate Director, Chris Parkins, Central Resources Manager, and Allison Mangini, Administrative Specialist. Before we begin, I want to advise all attendees that we are recording the hearing this evening. For everyone except agency staff and the applicant, your microphone is muted until it's time to testify. When your name is called, we will allow you to unmute your microphone, which is normally done by tapping the microphone symbol on your screen. If you're joining us by phone, you can unmute by typing *6 on your phone's keypad. You are welcome to testify with your video on or off. This hearing is an information gathering session and provides an opportunity for OPRD to hear directly from the public and from the applicant regarding the application materials submitted by Sea Ridge Homeowners Association. The application requests the construction of a riprap shoreline protection structure with integrated concrete stairs, approximately 600 feet in length, along the ocean shore at 4175 North Highway 101 in Depot Bay, Oregon. The Oregon Parks and Recreation Department is the agency responsible for administering the state's ocean shore laws originally adopted in the 1967 Beach Bill. Under these statutory provisions, a permit is required for any construction or alteration located seaward of the statutory vegetation line or the existing line of upland shore vegetation, whichever is further landward. The hearing this evening is related to permit application number 3051 and is being held under ocean shore rules that give the OPRD director discretion to hold a hearing. No decision will be made on this application tonight. Within 45 days after today's hearing, OPRD will make a permit decision. This decision will include consideration of the posted application materials and public comment received during the public notice and this hearing. The written decision will be posted on the OPRD Ocean Shore website. We will notify individuals who testify tonight and those that provided public comment once the permit decision is made. The standards for review are contained in Oregon Administrative Rules, Chapter 736, Division 20. OPRD rules list a number of considerations and criteria that OPRD uses in making a permit decision, including adequate justification for the project to occur on and alter the ocean shore, impacts to other property owners, compliance with statewide planning goals and local comprehensive plans, public opinion received in response to public notice or hearings, availability of reasonable alternatives that would better protect the public rights, avoid long-term costs to the public, or reduce or eliminate the detrimental effects on the ocean shore and its resources. These resources include such things as scenic value, recreation use, beach access, safety, fish, and wildlife in their habitats, unique features, and historic, cultural, and archaeological sites. Based on OPRD's preliminary review of the application, It is not clear if the proposal meets the applicable review criteria. This hearing will be an opportunity for the applicant to clearly identify how the application substantially and factually includes information which demonstrates there are no reasonable alternatives to the proposed design or construction methods that would better protect the ocean shore, including recreation, scenic, and natural resources. The proposed project was designed to avoid and minimize damage to and retain the scenic attraction of known ancient forest remnants in the project area. The project avoids impact to properties not owned by the applicant unless agreed to by the landowner. Our hearing procedure for this evening will be as follows. First, we'll call on the applicant to make a presentation describing the proposal and the need for the project as described in the originally provided application materials. They will be provided up to 30 minutes for this overview. You may type your questions for the applicant into the Q&A section of your Zoom window, and we will read them out if they pertain to the submitted application or the applicant's presentation. The applicant will choose which ones to answer. Following the applicant's presentation and any typed questions, we will call on anyone who wishes to testify. Speakers will be called from the Zoom registration list in the order they registered and be provided up to 3 minutes each to provide verbal testimony. During your testimony, please state any questions as issues of concern for the record. There will be no cross-examination of those testifying or back and forth with the applicant or agency staff. That said, I may ask questions of those testifying for clarification for the record. OPRD understands that some individuals may not be comfortable with public speaking. It is important for OPRD to hear from you, so we encourage you to use one or both of the following two options. First, provide a brief verbal response tonight. That would include your name and whether you are in support or opposition of the proposal. It is acceptable to then simply tag onto the comments made by another. This can be done simply by stating something like, my name is blank. I support the project and reiterate the comments of this person's testimony. Second, OPRD will accept written testimony from registered people for this meeting until 5 p.m. on August 19th. Written comments should be submitted by email to oceanshores.permits@oprd.oregon.gov, but can be submitted to my office address, email, or fax number at the OPRD office in Seal Rock. Following testimony, there will be a screen with that information for your use. If you have questions about the permit process, it would be best to pursue those questions outside of this meeting. I will be available this week following the hearing to answer any questions you might have regarding the permit decision process. At this time, I would like to ask the permit applicant or their representative to come forward and present the proposal.
Thank you, Hearings Officer Blanchette. Can you hear me okay? This is Will Rasmussen. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Will Rasmussen here from Miller Nash LLP on behalf of applicant Sea Ridge Condos. We, on behalf of the applicant, appreciate the opportunity to participate in this information gathering opportunity this evening, and specifically to respond to OPRD's 3 points of particular emphasis in their notice of this hearing. Our presentation will involve 3 people on behalf of the applicant, myself, Will Rasmussen, Miller Nash, Adam Large from Schlicker and Associates, and Abu Balgamwala from Sea Ridge HOA. I'm going to try to share my screen. Let's see if this works. Just one moment. Right. Can you please indicate if that is showing? Thank you, Hearings Officer Blanchette. Our presentation will be focused on the 3 impacts and questions posed in OPRD's notice, specifically how the application avoids and minimizes impact on the ancient forest remains. Second, how the proposal it reduces beach impact to the extent reasonably feasible. And third, how the impact avoids and minimizes, how the application avoids and minimizes any impacts on neighbors, particularly in response to questions posed by neighbors to the south about potential increased erosion and end effects from the revetment. As I go through these for my presentation, I'll focus on the legal aspects of it. But on each of these three areas, I'm first going to briefly discuss the law and what's actually required by the law in these three areas. Then I'm going to orient to the application materials and point out the facts that show that they're addressed. I'm also going to reference several additional facts that the applicant is going to be providing on the back end of this hearing to the agency to further demonstrate compliance with these three particular areas. Mr. Large is then going to get into individual design elements, factual history, and specific engineering technical aspects of the proposal and answer any technical questions that may arise. And Mr. Balgamwala is going to give the applicant's owner perspective, give some of the history involved with this site, and talk about why the approval is appropriate here. The first of the three elements I want to address, though, is the ancient forest remains or ancient forest remnants on this site. There are three particular administrative rules that apply to ancient forests in Oregon on the beach. They're quoted up on the screen. They're scenic standards, natural and cultural standards, and then in Division 21, there's some standards applicable to driftwood. I first want to point out that the Division 21 standards do not apply in the context of an ocean shore permitting context. That is purely standards that exist for certain personal uses that are allowed on the Oregon beaches without a permit. We're clearly in the permit context and in the ocean shore protective structure permitting context, and Division 21 just doesn't apply in this context. Of the two remaining standards that continue to exist, the scenic standards and those applicable to natural and cultural resources, they, in combination, both require that an applicant avoid and minimize impacts to those ancient forests. Particularly if you look at in provision 0030 in the middle of the screen, you'll see underlined projects on the ocean shore shall avoid or minimize damage to ... natural areas, including ancient forest remains. The avoid and minimize standard is one that OPRD is intimately familiar with because that is the standard that applies to almost all resources that exist on Oregon beaches. In fact, if you look at the scenic standards even applicable here in 0015, that same minimize and avoid standard applies there. Some of the language in 0015 can make it sound like you can't touch a stump, an ancient forest remnant, be it a stump or otherwise at all. But in fact, under the text and context analysis that applies for statutory interpretation and code interpretation in Oregon, you'll see that that standard is also a minimize and avoid standard. And we know that because in addition to listing ancient forest remains, the standard also lists beaches itself. And we know the whole statutory framework that exists for permitting revetments and other ocean shore protective structures inherently have some impact on the beach. You have to avoid that and minimize it to the extent feasible, but you can have some impact. The same standard applies to ancient forest remains here. Now, even though the standard is avoid and minimize, the Sea Ridge application tries to avoid the ancient forest entirely. And in fact, we think we avoid the ancient forest entirely by citing the proposed revetment landward, i.e. east of the known ancient forest remains. This is based on all the historic photos that HGSA has over the years. These are photos that have come from owners, from OPRD, and from HGSA itself in assessing this site for literally over 2 decades. It is our belief that there are no ancient forest remains proposed in the excavation area. that all of those ancient forest remains are west of the excavation area. Up on the screen are just two of the photos. There's no shortage of photos already in the record because Adam Large and HGSA flagged this issue right out of the gate for OPRD. And in our supplemental materials that we'll be submitting to the agency in the next day or two, they'll get a slew more of photos to look at the various times when these stumps have been exposed that document why we believe that they are not in the footprint of our revetment. Nonetheless, I'm not here to say we know with 100% certainty that there is not a stump in the footprint of the revetment. We really don't think there is, but to extinguish any chance that OPRD might be concerned that we're going to come in and destroy an ancient forest stump as part of this application, applicant is willing to accept really any reasonable condition of approval to ensure that we do not disturb the ancient forest remains. Up on the screen are several proposals. First one, really straightforward. Applicant shall not disturb ancient forest remains through its construction access to the project. Second one basically addresses construction access and excavation for the revetment itself. And the third one is I think probably the best up here. It says it would provide, prior to initiating construction of the project, permittee shall provide to OPRD a detailed plan to protect ancient forest remains adjacent to and in the vicinity of the work area. No work shall be conducted until the plan has been reviewed and found to be adequate to protect the resources. I like that one because it ensures nothing happens until OPRD is comfortable with the plan to protect the ancient forest remains. And I will confess, I cribbed that condition of approval from a 2019 approval from OPRD from a similarly situated site that has ancient forest remains very similar, near identical to this subject site. And that project was built, constructed, worked just fine, and it avoided the ancient forest remains. All right, I'm going to move on to the kind of second global issue that OPRD raised in its notice, which is largely regarding minimizing impact to the beach, that there be no reasonable alternatives that would better protect the ocean shore, including the recreation, scenic, and natural resources. This, there's half dozen criteria in OPRD's bailiwick that basically calls for this. In the introduction to the hearing this evening, Hearings Officer Blanchette flagged OAR 736-020-0003 sub 7 about avoiding impacts to these natural resources. And
I'm sorry, William, just to break in for a second. Chris with OPRD, would you mind going to slide presentation mode? I have a request from the audience to make this a little larger on screen so that they can read it.
Absolutely. Great. Thank you for jumping in there, Chris.
Sure.
And I apologize. I am not the best at running. Yeah,
it's all right. Thank you.
Slide presentation. All right. Is that what you were looking for? Great. See some nods.
Yeah, exactly right. Thank you.
At the introduction, Hearings Officer Blanchette flagged one of these provisions that generally call for minimizing impact to the beach. I will just say that both that administrative rule and indeed the statutory framework that overlays that administrative rule generally calls for reducing impacts to all these natural resources and cultural resources and scenic resources. But that's all in the context of allowing a project to move forward. Once an applicant submits a project to protect their property, if they're allowed to do that under Goal 18, they get to move forward. They just need to minimize those impacts. That inherently calls for balancing. The entire statutory framework calls for balancing these interests because sometimes something's in the interest of a cultural resource that might not be in the interest of a neighbor, or it might be in the interest of a natural resource, but hurt a cultural resource, or it might just prevent a project from being able to move forward. Here, this revetment has been designed to minimize all of those resources to the extent reasonably feasible. And these criteria have the word reasonable in them. It can't be read out of the statutes and administrative rules. H.G. Schlicker, Adam Large on this call, assessed this from various angles and concludes in a supplemental report that will come to OPRD tomorrow or the next day. There are no reasonable alternatives to the proposed design that would better protect the ocean shore, including recreation, scenic, and natural resources, and adequately protect the subject site and adjacent sites. That does not come out of a vacuum or out of just desire from an engineer to get whatever he wants. That's based on the existing conditions of the site, the previous recommendations and authorizations by OPRD and the Department of State Lands, Oregon's own guidebook on erosion control practices on the Oregon coast, which was prepared by DLCD, accepted modern design principles and elements for oceanfront protective measures, and indeed, HGSA has more than 30 years of experience designing oceanfront protective measures in Oregon. It's not hyperbole to say that HGSA might be the global expert in Oregon erosion. They have worked on these projects and seen what has worked and not worked for decades, and that expertise should not be disregarded. A general question that I think surrounds this application, and frankly, it seems to be burbling up in many OPRD applications of late, is why not shift the revetment inland? Why not shift it east? Geez, can't you just push it inland and then that reduces the impact on the beach, which I think is a fair question, viewing these from a site plan standpoint. This revetment cannot be shifted east based on the current information in the record and the engineering geologist recommendation. The shoreline bluff at this location has dramatically retreated. It's within 18 feet as of last year, it might be even closer now, of critical stormwater and sanitary sewer infrastructure. That's infrastructure that serves the entire Sea Ridge condominiums development. The design of the recommended riprap structure, it's based on modern standards which cannot be significantly altered without undermining its performance. Just a note for the record, the property shorelines at this location, the shoreline dune once receded 40 feet in a single winter back in 97, 98. And just generally speaking, with this revetment, the slope, the width, the depth, the continuity, and the placement of it in relation to the beach all impact its ability to protect the subject property. And particularly, why not just dive into the east? Disturbance of upland native soils are to be minimized to the extent feasible under engineering, geologic standards, approaches, literature that exists in this space. If you think about most of these properties and Sea Ridge specifically, you have a bluff coming up, and then soon you run into the infrastructure. Here are the condos and the sewer and water. If you disturb those soils, it makes it more likely that erosion happens and that other bad outcomes happen upland from the revetment site. Third and lastly, the third criterion raised in the notice, can we discuss impact to property owners not owned by the applicant? I put up on the screen the kind of governing rules, the administrative rules that relate to abutting owners. The most on point one, and the one that speaks to the concern raised by the abutting owners to the south, is up first on the screen, provision 020-0025 sub 3, specifically called neighboring properties, says, quote, the project shall be designed to avoid or minimize ocean erosion or safety problems for neighboring properties. This is clearly not a zero impact criterion. It clearly does not require a signature from abutting owners to have an impact from edge erosion. And it's expressly for this exact situation. Kind of the other provision up on the screen, section 003 sub 13. It has language that sounds like it gives anybody impacted a veto authority over ocean shore structure. The language, the issuance of a permit hereunder will affect a property not owned by the applicant. So if there's any effect, if it affects their view, if it affects the way the water flows in front of their property, if it affects the sound that impacts them from the construction, does that mean the applicant cannot move forward without a quote easement license or other written authorization from a fee owner of such land? No, that provision only applies in situations where there's a physical occupation of another property. So if part of a revetment is going to be built on that property, or if more likely access needs to be taken across the property, that's the situation where easements and licenses and abilities to use a specific property come into play. If this second provision here, in fact, meant that anybody who's affected, any affected property had a gripe about a development, even though it wasn't physically intruded upon, that they could block that development, that first provision up there that specifically applies to neighboring properties would be meaningless, would have no meaning under the statute, under the administrative rule. And that, under plain rules of statutory interpretation, is just inaccurate. There's specific designs put into the revetment that I'll largely let Adam talk about to prevent and actually avoid, not even minimize, but avoid impacts on the neighbors to the south and the neighbors to the north. The revetment tapers into topography with minimal disturbance to native soils. The literature says that's the primary way to avoid those impacts. And the physical elements around the site actually make that southern taper really effective. And last bullet point, we will get the agency's supplemental information on this. The proposal will not increase the mapped erosion rate of abutting properties, i.e. zero impact avoided. This slide, I will just say, agencies sometimes have a tendency to look at their rules really close and decide they mean something than they've applied them as before. There's obviously discretion to a degree in OPRD's administrative rules, things like minimize or grayscales. You need a balance, you need to make judgment calls. But OPRD has a really long history of administering these exact administrative rules. And there is a limit to how far an agency can go in changing its interpretation of a rule from what it's done in prior applications. Essentially, agencies are required to treat similarly situated applicants the same. And these two particular areas of rules at issue here regarding minimizing impacts to the beach and minimizing impacts to the neighbors have been interpreted by the agency many, many, many times. And there is countless examples of OPRD approved revetments in Lincoln County and elsewhere in Oregon with very similar facts where OPRD approved the thing by interpreting the administrative rule a particular way. If the agency were to diametrically make a huge shift and say, no, we actually interpret that same old rule in this entirely new way to result in a denial, that violates a couple of laws. In this context, it would be the Oregon Administrative Rules Act that says you need to go through a rulemaking to change what your rules mean, and the Privileges and Immunities Clause of the Oregon Constitution. I don't think those will come into play, but we will submit a little supplemental information to the agency on how we think those work. To wrap up my comments, the Sea Ridge condo owners just deserve protection. They're just people living in their homes. They've been through years of process to get to this point. The county and LCDC have decided it's appropriate to have a revetment here. They demonstrate compliance with OPRD rules in this application and just want to protect their homes. I'm going to pass it over to Adam Large at this point to add a little technical information for the agency.
Great, thank you, Will. Hi, everybody. My name is Adam Large. I'm the principal engineering geologist here at H.E. Schlichter Associates. I've been the principal here for about 3 years since our previous principal, Doug Gless, retired. I've been working here for about 7 years, all of which has been involved with a lot of work along the ocean shore with the design and analysis of revetments. HGSA in general has over 30 years of working on the ocean shore and designing revetments under Doug Less. And he trained me how they're properly supposed to be built on the Oregon coast, which is extremely dynamic. And every site has individual conditions that require an individual solution. When I reached out to Mr. Blanchett about better clarification on what OPRD was looking for, I was directed to Will. So a lot of what you might hear will be a little repetitive. However, it's my understanding that with the point of that there are no reasonable alternatives to the proposed design or construction methods, the issue is why can't it move further east, as Will said. I will get into that. Was the project designed to avoid or minimize damage to the forest remnants? I will get into that as well. And then thirdly, whether or not the project avoids impacts to owners. Our understanding was that predominantly focused on end effects and the potential for increased erosion on the neighboring properties. In our report, we explicitly discussed all of these things. This is our figure 4 that has been modified a little bit. In regards to the location of the revetment and why it can't move further east, as Will said, the closest surveyable critical infrastructure for the Sea Ridge condominiums was 18 feet from the bluff edge at the time the survey was completed. It probably is closer now. There's stormwater infrastructure at the southern end that's approximately 25 feet, and the stormwater drainage, the curtain drain, has frequently been exposed at the northern end, which the current location at the time of the survey was unknown, but the sewer line behind it was located approximately 25 feet from the bluff edge. All of this critical infrastructure has to be protected in order for the Sea Ridge condominiums to take care of their infrastructure. The proposed alignment also can't impact any of that. It has to provide accommodation space to maintain and have properly working infrastructure in the future. In addition to the location of the infrastructure limiting where the revetment can go to the east, how far east it can go, the proposed alignment is significantly further east than what OPRD and DSL had previously suggested should be the emergency action line for constructing revetment at the site. Erosion at the beach is beyond that line, which was previously approved in, I believe, 1989, and was renewed in sand grading permits until the mid-90s. Also on this, we can address the third question of how are the impacts to neighboring properties minimized.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Adam, before you move on to that one, we have a question why the infrastructure can't be moved.
It services the entire development. I suppose you would have to have a civil engineer redesign the entire infrastructure system for the entire development. You have to contact the county for the pump station.
I would also add that past practice at OPRD has demonstrated in its decisions is to protect this type of infrastructure and frankly not mandate its removal for catch basins and sewers and the like.
Are there any other questions about that, Chris? Or?
Nope, we're good. Go ahead.
In regards to the neighboring properties, it's a standard practice in design of revetments to taper in the ends of the revetments and to wrap it in to the bank to minimize the end effects on adjacent properties that are unprotected. It's the best way to do it. It is successful all up and down the Oregon coast, and that's pretty much it for end effects. The alternative would be to not do that, and then you're gonna have greater end effects. So we opt for reducing the effects on the neighbors. In addition, there won't be increased erosion. The mapped erosion rate will change or will not change. The erosion on the beach it's seasonal, and there are times when it can be extreme. There are times when it can be minimal. But there will not be a significant change to the mapped erosion rate. Additionally, moving the bank to the east on the south would necessitate cutting into the native soils there, which would further increase the potential to impact the neighbor to the south. I will mention later when referring to the stumps that it is an option to do that to avoid or minimize damage to the ancient forest remnants, but it's certainly not a preferred method to then shift some of the burden to the adjacent neighbor. So let's talk about the stumps. In 1997, there was an article that Dogami published in regards to the stumps.
Adam, can I interrupt you just for 1 second before we dive into the stumps?
Sure.
I'm just going to let you know that we've got a 5-minute warning for your total of 30 minutes.
Okay, I'll go quick.
All right, thanks.
There were 7 stumps known at the time along Lincoln Beach in 1997. In 1999, erosion started to take the sand off the beach, and there's photographic evidence of the stumps, significantly further west of Sea Ridge than the proposed revetment. This slide, I don't know if you can see my mouse, but this picture is at the southernmost extent of the Sea Ridge property, where stumps may be closer to the bank and may be encountered during construction. However, in our report, we say that if that occurs, we need to be consulted to readjust the alignment, the toe trench depth. We don't specify what needs to happen because we haven't encountered the conditions yet, so we can't give recommendations on what will happen. But time and time again, when the stumps are exposed, they appear further west than the proposed revetment. In addition, we did a project approximately 400 feet south of Sea Ridge that also had the stumps. That was approved in 2019 or 2018, construction finished in 2020. We successfully constructed a revetment there without impacting the stumps. And it was through coordination and communication with OPRD to make sure that the project was designed appropriately and implemented during construction. And it was a very successful project that is looking good right now. With that, I'll turn it over to, here is a cutout of the condition and the finding of facts from permit number 2898 for anybody's reference as well. I'll turn it over to Abu so we can close this out. Thank you.
In the interest of time, we will send you this thing in writing and things like that, so you have a full impact of it. I think we just want people to know that the Sea Ridge really is concerned about the preserving and the beauty of the Oregon coast and things like that. And if anybody gets a feeling that we are against that particular part of it and want our rep, despite that, it's an unwarranted categorization and things like that. Our owners basically do other stuff and things like that out there. We also have worked with collaboration with Ocean down there. We basically made a whole bunch of changes to our plan. And therefore, we basically would like to see this permit because we're spending money. We have got OPRD spending $1 million to do that. And we have got an exception to the Goal 18 exception because of that. We have basically put money in there, and for the last 20 years, put money in there, which has gone down the drain. And as our owners, we cannot continue to watch and be uncertain every single year as these things happen. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Tyler. If you're ready, I'll just plunge forward. I work for you. Okay. Great. Good evening. Chris Havel with the Oregon Parks and Recreation Department. Those of you who are here, you signed up for testimony. I will call your name in the order you registered. Give me a moment after I call your name to allow you to unmute, but then you watch for that notice on your screen. You'll have to unmute yourself. When you're unmuted, identify yourself by first and last name, please. Speak for up to 3 minutes. Address any questions you might have as concerns for the record. Neither staff nor the applicant are going to be responding during testimony. So if you want to put something on the record as a question or a concern, do it that way rather than pause and expect an answer or something like that. I will have a timer up on the screen for 3 minutes. At the end of that 3 minutes, if you're not done by then, we'll remind you to wrap it up. We do have quite a few people online. Ask you that you respect time. If somebody has made the same points as you, you might save a little time by simply agreeing with some of those past statements and save some time for somebody else. When we get to the end of the list of people that I've pulled from registration, in case there's somebody here who registered at the very, very last minute, we'll ask to see if anybody else wants to testify that I haven't called yet. Then I'll turn it back over to Tyler to complete the hearing. Just give me a second here to get our timer up on the screen. Well, okay. Let me turn my camera off so I don't get confused. Great. All right. And I apologize in advance. I'm going to mangle some of your names. You feel free to correct it when you give your name first and last as part of the testimony, but I apologize for that in advance. First up, we have, this is the first name of the evening that I'll get wrong, Jack Menashe or Menashe.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to mention that we are, my name is Jack Menashe, and we own the parcel due north of Sea Ridge on the ocean front. And I just wanted to speak out in support of the proposal. And I echo everything that Mr. Rasmussen said in terms of this proposal and its viability under the law. I have no other further comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Jack. Doug Slama. Oops. Sorry. Hit the wrong Slama. There you go, Doug. Doug, I see your mic is unmuted, but we can't hear you. There you go.
Can you hear me now?
Yep, sure can. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Doug Slama. I'm a part owner of 4075 Lincoln Avenue in Depot Bay. So we're the neighbors directly to the south of Sea Ridge. And I'm testifying in opposition to the revetment primarily because I'm concerned about the spillover effect from the displaced waves that are going to hit that. To a little background, my family has been an owner of this property since 1967. Originally, there was 3 families that all owned a third. Now there's 2 families from the original that still own it. We've all watched what happens when the ocean hits structures, and we all know that basalt rocks divert waves. And so if there's an armament 600 feet long in front of Sea Ridge and there's nothing in front of our property directly south of this property, it stands to reason, no matter what the design is, that we will have increased erosion. That increased erosion is not natural erosion because it's directed from that seawall. So that will take some of our property away that, again, has been in the family since 1967. There was a article by Stephen Dundas in the Journal of Environmental Economics and Management that was printed in January of 21 that states that properties adjacent to properties that put up armament lose 8% of their value. So our property on Zillow is $1.4 million. So that's $109,000 makes our property less valuable when and if that armament gets put in. So and then and we're not approved for armament. So if we decide as a group that we want to move forward as an armament, estimates for our 100 feet of armament would be somewhere in the range of $250,000. And that's not doable for several of our owners. And again, we've had this property long before Sea Ridge, and it seems like we're being forced into either having increased erosion or trying to come up with $250,000. That's it.
All right, thank you. Philip Johnson.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Thanks. I'm Philip Johnson. I am the Shoreline and Land Use Manager for the Oregon Shores Conservation Coalition. I'm speaking in opposition to the project. We will be submitting written comments subsequent to this, going into detail on why on specific points we don't think the application is adequate. I'll just make two broad points here. One is that we do not believe that OPRD should be granting permits for shoreline alteration until there's a comprehensive plan that addresses the potential for cumulative impacts to the Oregon shore, based on science, based on the best possible projections of future sea level rise, future storm surges, and how they could cause projects to impact the public shoreline, and particularly cost access north and south, lateral access along the shoreline. It's sort of maddening to hear lawyers sort of with a veiled threat of a lawsuit if OPRD does not follow past practices, because those past practices were not based on what we now know about sea level rise and other climate change effects, sort of would prohibit OPRD from learning anything. So, again, we urge OPRD to put a hold on granting permits until there is a comprehensive plan that does address cumulative impacts. The other very general point I want to make is that this application is frustrating in the way that so many that we review are, which is to say it does not really seriously dig into the key questions that affect the public interest. We've learned more tonight now about what they plan to do, for instance, with the ancient forest, and we're promised a supplemental report, and then maybe we'll learn more yet. But based on that application, as with so many, there's maybe 150-page long application with endless detail on what they plan to do. But when they talk about things such as impacts to lateral or adjacent properties, there'll be just a sentence assuring us that won't happen. When we talk about possible nature-based solutions as an alternative to hardened structures, again, there's just one or two sentences that just sort of dismisses the possibility. In particular, there's just no serious consideration of relocating the properties. So, for instance, the testimony tonight talked repeatedly about the impossibility, or at least the inadvisability, of moving the revetment further inland. It doesn't just address the possibility of moving the actual infrastructure inland. And we strongly urge OPRD not to consider garages and other outbuildings to be untouchable infrastructure when making that consideration. Just as a general point, as sea level, as we get constant changes in this dynamic environment pushed by climate change, we need to preserve the capacity for adaptive management, and more hardened structures cutting beaches off from their sand supply is not the way to do that. So at the very least, this needs to be put on hold until there's truly exhaustive information on why there can't be a relocation, can't be nature-based solutions, and why this won't affect the public interest in the shoreline. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Philip. I don't see Brian Witchner here. If he joins later, we'll come back to him. Kevin Thompson.
Hi, my name is Kevin Thompson. I own the second house to the south of Sea Ridge Condos. I've owned the property there for 15 years, and our house is 68 years old. The bank on the property has been stable from the time that I owned it. It has some erosion, but nothing serious. It does not have riprap armor. It is a natural clay bank with vegetation. When we're looking at properties, the real estate agent that worked with me said that the bank was the most important thing to look at when considering oceanfront property. And she felt, and I felt, that the bank there is stable. And we are just very concerned with 600 feet of riprap armor going in, just 100 feet from us, that our property is going to be impacted. And right now, as far as I know, no one is giving us an opportunity to provide armor on our property unless it's an emergency situation. And as we all know, things are going to cost a lot more to do in an emergency situation. Anyway, I'm not for this proposal, and that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see Rennie Ferris. If you do show up later, we'll come back to you. David Slama.
Hello. Can you
Hi,
hear
go
me?
ahead. Yep.
Doug's my brother, and I thought he stated the situation pretty well. Kevin's my neighbor, and I agree with him too. I don't know if I have much to add other than they say nothing's going to happen to us. What if it does? I mean, what happens if it does? Are they willing to put in a wall for us? Are they willing to, I don't know, rebuild the bank? That's what I'm concerned about. And I watched the presentation, and it just seems like David versus Goliath. We have this big condominium complex that goes in next to us that came way after we lived there. I remember playing in the woods where that was. And now they are dictating what we do. And we may have to, like my brother said, sell our house because we won't be able to afford riprap, which would be a shame. That's all I can add, I think. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Jim Good, I don't see you in the attendee list. Mark Allen.
Hello, my name is Mark Allen. I'm a resident of Sea Ridge with my wife Suzanne, and I would like to speak in favor of the revetment. I would like to touch on something that hasn't been mentioned, but I think is pertinent, which is that the vast preponderance of dwellings on the Lincoln Beach already have revetments of one size or another. And so we're not asking for something unusual here. We're asking for something that has been past practice and recognized as a reasonable remedy for property owners to enjoy and preserve their properties. So I would encourage approval of the very carefully prepared plan that we have invested considerable energy and effort into, and think it is a reasonable and appropriate project. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. I do not see Joe Gibbs, Lawrence Dworkin, Mary Jane Bonelitz. If I'm missing you at some point, post something in the Q&A. Moving down the list to not seeing David Abrams, Richard Stover.
Hello, can you hear me?
Sure can, go ahead.
All right. My name is Rick Stover, or Richard Stover. I'm a homeowner in Sea Ridge in L2. We've lived there for almost 4 years now. I'm speaking to you guys in not in support of the project. In 4 years, I've not really seen a lot of movement with the beach, and I've sent that in my notes that I sent in. The other thing is the concern I have is for our neighbors in each direction, and many of them have made some excellent points of what's going on there and their issues and whatnot. This is the homeowners that are only a subset of the total group of homeowners that have beach access right there. They're the ones in somewhat peril, according to them. I don't see it, but I don't have all the facts, and nor am I trained enough to know those things, and rely on the experts who've made some great presentation skills, some points on their comments and whatnot. But from where I'm at, I don't see the value there for that. We all bought our homes and locations, even not in Sea Ridge, with knowing that the Pacific Ocean was right there, knowing that Highway 101 was behind us, knowing that there's forest and the threat of forest fires and other natural occurrences like a tsunami. But so I think we all took the risk when we bought there. And I think putting something in that saves us at the cost of someone else is not the proper thing to do. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Richard. Not seeing Lanny Cooper, which brings us to Mike Marsden.
Yes, hello. This is Mike Marsden, and I'm with Sea Ridge. I am for the proposal. I think Abu and the people who have worked on this process for the last 30, 40 years have done a marvelous job of trying to make sure that it works for everybody. There's no question that if there was erosion that affected the front condominiums, everybody's property, south and north, will decline, because it's going to be hard to want to buy a house or a condo when they see somebody else's neighbors have all sorts of issues. Much like we saw with the houses that rights is south of the RV park that requested some type of protection for many, many, many years, and only got it when everybody realized their house was going to go in to the beach. I think it's an unfortunate situation which happened. Our condos were built in 77, not much longer than in 66, 67, 68. And I think we recognize that this has been a process and an issue for a long, long time. I know it's a delicate situation, but I think having the protection on our condos will go a long way to help everybody's property values in the future. Okay, and thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Donald Benz. Donald, if you'd like to testify, you need to manually unmute.
Oh, there, finally.
Yep,
I was able
it's
to
all right.
click the unmute. Oh, you
Thank
only
you.
gave me 55 seconds.
Yeah, I haven't reset the timer yet. Was waiting to hear
Okay,
from you.
thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you. I'm Donald Benz. I'm also one of the owners at Sea Ridge, have been an owner since 1991. And in that 30 plus years, we have seen significant withdrawal of the beachfront, and some years more than 70 feet. It comes back and forth, but it has significantly eroded over the years. I would like to point out that the issue of erosion is true on both north and south side. And partly because of that, we are the brunt of that erosion. If you look at the north end of our property, that's where it has really threatened the sewage, et cetera, and that's from the wave action coming from the south that is protected. Almost all of the properties south of us are protected except the two people that have already testified. We have been granted the Goal 18 exemption. We qualify for protection, as have all the other properties. You also heard about Two Homes North. Worldmark also was granted protection permit. The home about 3 or 4 south of us was granted protection, as you already heard, in 2020. So over 90% of this littoral cell, which is the area from Fishing Rocks to the tip of Salishan, is protected. The unprotected areas are the exception, and they're bearing the brunt of the protection, and they deserve the same protection as those that do. So I urge you to equitably allow us to proceed with this protection by approving our requested permit application. Thank you.
Thank you, Donald. Not seeing Dale Lely, which takes us to Andrew Fitzgerald.
This is Andrew Fitzgerald.
Hi, Andrew, go ahead.
I will submit a written comment on this. I did not prepare one to speak, so my application was for a written comment, which I will proceed on submitting to you after this meeting.
All right, great, thanks. Watch for that contact info at the end, where we can mail it to you separately. Thank you so much. Not seeing Jill Marks or Greg Chandler. Terry Holden.
Am I connected?
You certainly are, Terry. Go ahead.
I also live at Sea Ridge, and I agree with the professionals that spoke on behalf of Sea Ridge, and also Mr. Allen, Mr. Marsden, Mr. Benz, and others in favor of the project. And to me, where so much of this area is protected and we're one of the few that aren't, as a homeowner, it feels like we should have the right to protect our property. And I guess, again, I agree with the people that have spoken on behalf of it, and that's all I have on it.
All right, Terry, thank you. Not seeing Michael Harrington. Let me double check. Okay. Kaya Hazard.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Kaya.
Thanks. Thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. My name's Kaya Hazard. I'm the Oregon Regional Manager for the Surfrider Foundation. Surfrider opposes this application for riprap in Depot Bay. We're in opposition to all armoring of the shoreline, as it degrades our beloved public beaches and leads to loss of a public resource for future generations. Riprap accelerates erosion and causes steeper, more narrow beaches. The end result is the loss of safe public access, recreational use, and important habitat along Oregon's iconic shore. This stretch of shoreline is already heavily armored, and the effects of this development have already become clear. When one property armors the shore, it puts the adjacent properties at higher risk. This can eventually lead to the demise of an entire beach. However, tonight, the applicant spent more time debating the interpretation of the law than actually demonstrating an earnest design effort to minimize impacts on neighboring properties or the public beach. Our beaches and dunes are protected by Goal 18. This is the only thing standing between our largely wild and undeveloped coastline and losing our beaches to seawalls and riprap. This property has received an exception to Goal 18, which makes this an outstandingly unique situation. In a unique case like this, with the Goal 18 exception, the application must not only meet the standards and requirements put in place by the state, it must exceed them with an equally unique and thorough application. I don't believe the applicant has done so here. Surfrider does not believe that a 600-foot-long riprap structure is the solution. The application has not provided adequate exploration and analysis of alternatives to shoreline armoring as is required. Not only must this standard be upheld, this consideration will be crucial as we respond to sea level rise and climate change in our coastal communities. In particular, exhausting alternatives, including economic evaluations and analysis, is critical for such an outstanding and unique situation that could lead to a Goal 18 exception. Riprap is not a permanent solution. It requires ongoing maintenance and doesn't account for loss of the public resource. However, there are viable alternatives which better protect the public right. Relocation or creation of a living shoreline must be seriously considered in this application. While the future of this beach may be uncertain, I hope that you still uphold the standards and requirements put in place to approve applications such as this, especially so in the case of a Goal 18 exception. Thank you for hearing my testimony tonight. Your consideration of these comments in review of this application is greatly appreciated.
All right, thank you, Kaya. Robert Davies.
Hello, am I on now?
You are.
Hello, good evening. My name is Robert Davies, Robert Sally Davies. We're owners at Sea Ridge as well. And we also are in support of the revampment. I think in these times when we're all facing the onslaught of higher tides, warmer oceans, and the weather changing, I think it's important that we look at protecting our properties that we have and doing it in the most aesthetic and effective ways that would maintain the beauty of Oregon that we all love. That's why we all live here. And I think the placement of the riprap and the cement will protect the beauty of the shoreline with a natural barrier. It also, though, will protect the economic interests of scores of people, and the economic impact of scores of people with their houses and their residents. So I'm very much in favor of the placement of the riprap and yield to the professionals who have well stated that this is a very safe and a comprehensive and an effective way of protecting beauty and soil erosion and our economic interests. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Marcos Mendoza. Yeah, you should be able to unmute your mic there, Marcos, if you'd like to speak. We'll come back to you, Marcos. Dan Kaufman. Dan, you do have the ability to unmute your mic, but you have to do that manually. We'll come back to you. Vince Papalardo.
Hello, my name is Vince Papalardo. I am opposed to any riprap. Being from California, but being in Oregon for the last 25 years, I've seen the effects of it. And you will most certainly see the scouring of the beaches in front of your riprap take your beach away. I know you're building a staircase down to it, but you won't have a beach to go to. Plus, once the riprap ends, your erosion around the ends will start to decay and your ends will start falling in. I'm in very much sympathy of your southern owners that will suffer the brunt of this riprap. I urge you to seek other solutions. I know the engineers are telling you this is the only thing. I am an engineer myself, a mechanical engineer, not a civil engineer, but I don't believe that they're serving in your best interest. And I also did not appreciate the first speaker bullying us with the law. We are Oregonians. We have a right to the beach, period. That is all I have to say.
Thank you, Vince. Not seeing either Barb or Bill Ruti, which takes us down to Charlie Plyben.
Hey, thanks. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, Charlie.
Thank you, Chris. Thanks for the opportunity to testify. I'll be brief. I think my colleague Kaya Hazard spoke to many of the points. Charlie Plyben, Surfrider Foundation's Oregon Policy Manager for the record. But she spoke to many of the points of our organization. I'd like to just speak to a Central Coast resident who loves the beach and cares about the beach and spends a lot of time surfing and recreating in that littoral cell area that was spoken of. And I've heard a lot of discussion tonight about the right to protect homes and the right to protect property. There's also the shoreline and the ocean shore, which is property that we would like to see protected. And we don't believe that the applicant has exhausted really all the alternative analysis or the potential impacts on that public resource. In fact, when I really look at this littoral cell, and there is an exceptional amount of riprap and shoreline armoring in this littoral cell, and the public's opportunity and their access points are limited. And you have to look no further than Glen Eden Beach to actually see the impacts of riprap to the north and the south. If you look at that beach recreation site, really the only state recreation site and access point there that's got a large parking lot for the public that's within this littoral cell. So it's already having an impact on the access point alone, the amount of riprap up and down this area. I think it's important that we exhaust a lot of alternatives and really consider the unique situation of this Goal 18 exception, the limited opportunity that exists today for the public resource, and the impacts that this will have on that public resource in the future. I'll stop there, and thanks so much for the opportunity to testify.
Thank you, Charlie. Ed Tanabe.
Hi, this is Ed Tanabe. I live at about a mile north of Sea Ridge. And while I sympathize with the homeowners to the south, I support the application. I've worked with Will and Adam in the past, and I found them to be exceptional people, and they took more interest in this project than just considering the law. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ed. Cameron Perry. Cameron, you'll need to unmute if you'd like to speak.
Yes, hi. Good evening, everybody. It's a nice sunny day here in Portland. And I've been a homeowner at Sea Ridge for 36 years and have watched the erosion occur. We used to have about 40 feet in front of our area, and now we're down to about 20. So we are concerned that this will continue and will eventually destroy probably a good part of the condominiums that in Sea Ridge. So something has to be done. And I think I applaud Don Benz and Mark Allen for what they have said. I feel like Sea Ridge has done as much as they can in protecting the beach and to also protect our condominiums and different homeowners. I want to say that I hope the application is approved, and we're in a situation where we do not want to affect the beach. We love the beach, and we think that what we have proposed is going to keep the beach the way it is, as well as protect the condominiums at Sea Ridge. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Cameron. Jennifer Clammer.
Thank you. I will submit written testimony. I am Jennifer Clammer, Al Clammer. I'm directly to the south of the Sea Ridge development.
Okay. Thank you. Jean Burback.
I'm Jean Burback with Sea Ridge, and I support this application. I'll have to say, when we initially moved there and 7 years ago, I had the same concerns Kaya has expressed. But after hours and hours of discussion and bringing in the experts, looking at the situation, watching the property through the storms, I have to agree with what the plan that has been submitted to you, and I am in support of it. I hope you approve it. Thank you.
Thank you, Jean. Eric Winston, we did get your note that you were here to watch rather than testify. We get to the end of the hearing and you change your mind, we'll come back to you. Cynthia Groby.
Hi, yes, I'm Cynthia Groby. I'm a part owner directly with a home directly south of Sea Ridge. And I just really share the same concerns in opposition to this project that many of you have brought up. I just, when we're told, yeah, your property won't be affected at all, I just don't know. I just like to see more evidence that that is the case in other situations. I also support what those from Oregon Surfriders have said about really looking into what other alternatives might be available. So thank you.
Thank you, Cynthia. Allison Cornelis. Apologize for that.
Yes, I'm Allison Cornelis. I'm an owner of the property directly south of Sea Ridge. I am in opposition to this project. I think our concerns have been expressed. And I do agree that the application did not address all other alternatives that might be considered. And I hope that OPRD takes into consideration that because of this exception. So I am in opposition to this, and I am also going to send a written testimony. Thank you.
Thank you, Allison. Not seeing Stephen Leday or James Slama. Gary Sherman. Gary, if you'd like to testify, you'll need to unmute. We will come back to you, Gary. Alicia Schultz. Alicia, you will need to unmute your mic if you'd like to testify. We will come back to you. Julie Slama.
Hi there. I think a number of concerns have been stated already. I'm one of the owners to the south. There's concerns about loss of property, about financials, about environmentals, all that I addressed earlier in a letter. And I agree, it is kind of like David versus Goliath. And I've heard a number of Sea Ridge people mentioned that it will not be affected. And one in particular said, except for two to the south. And what about those two to the south? We're one of them. There's no alternative for us because we don't qualify. So there's a concern there. And then there's the financial, could we even afford it? So I don't think that was taken into consideration. And then Kaya mentioned my concern about, I've looked into a number of alternatives, and there's so many people and so many institutions, higher ed and sea organizations that support other methods. Even the National Park Service wrote in a letter or in a statement article that although they, meaning seawalls, hold soils in place behind the structure, seawalls usually accelerate erosion on adjacent beaches. And it goes on to say, in some instances, the beach migrates entirely to the base of the seawall and disappears completely. And so what I'm wondering is, at what point are we going to actually worry about, you know, the beaches being completely eroded and disappearing because of seawalls? And when are we looking at alternatives? Again, we didn't hear any concerns to the neighbors who will be impacted and their alternatives. And this just reminds me of years and years ago when we owned the, property in Sea Ridge was built, and they clearly ruined the forest that was there. Didn't leave but maybe a handful of trees. So are they going to now ruin the beach for everyone as well? I know that's not their concern, but they say they're concerned to have the beauty of the environment, but that hasn't been the past, and we haven't seen any other alternatives. So if that could be addressed, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. I'm going to come back to the 4 people who are present, signed up to testify, but did not speak. If you are ready to testify, raise your hand. You'll see an icon for raising your hand at the bottom of your Zoom window normally. If you're on a desktop, I'm not sure where it is if you're here on a phone, but just raise a hand if you can, or type something in the Q&A.
Chris just did.
And that's Marcus Mendoza.
A number of those people are proponents that just want to submit written comments. So I think I recognize many of the names you said as folks that just want to submit a written comment. So I wouldn't be surprised if you don't get many takers here.
Okay, I appreciate that. Dan Kaufman, Gary Sherman, Alicia Schultz. Not seeing any other hands raised for actually wanting to speak tonight. I have made a note that you are here, though. Is there anybody who has not yet testified, whose name I have not called, that would like to do so before I turn the hearing back over to Hearings Officer Tyler. If you would like to speak, raise your hand or type something in the Q&A. All right, turn it back over to you, Tyler. Thank you.
Thank you all for participating. I'm now going to close the hearing. However, as stated earlier, your written testimony will be accepted until 5 p.m. on August the 19th. Now the meeting is adjourned, and I will throw up that information about how to submit comments.
I will leave this meeting running for about 5 more minutes and then close it down. We do have a YouTube channel. The link was in the original news release and the announcement for this meeting. If there's something here you want to go back to, you'll find it in the YouTube stream. It usually takes several hours for those things to process, so you'd have to check back tomorrow, I think, safest to catch the video and copy the information out of it.